Stood there, breath caught in my chest as the room silenced around me. The wine glass in my hand trembled slightly, catching the soft candle light and throwing fractured shadows across the linen tablecloth. Across the table, my sister's smile was razor thin, and her words had landed like a slap. You judge other people's families, Evelyn Hart, because you don't have one of your own. There it was. The humiliation, the sting, the truth twisted just enough to wound Nora Hart. Now, Vivian Hart had always known where to cut deepest, but before I could even respond, it was her fiancé, Richard Evans, who pushed his chair back, the scrape of it loud and shocking in the hush. He turned not to Vivian, but to me. "You're the judge tonight," he said evenly, looking straight at me. "So tell them what happened 5 years ago." My heart stuttered, my stomach twisted. Every memory I had buried under years of silence clawed its way back into the light. I could feel my mother's eyes on me, confused, my father's fingers tightening around his napkin, and Vivian, her face had gone ashen. Richard knew. Somehow he knew. And as the silence closed in, as the weight of decades of favoritism, cruelty, and manipulation filled every corner of that dining room, I realized this was it. The moment I had never dared imagine, the chance to finally speak the truth. Not the version dressed up in pretty bows for family peace, but the raw, fractured, brutal truth that had shaped my life and broken part of me forever. My voice was calm, too calm for the emotion boiling inside me. 5 years ago, I began. Vivian called me at 3:00 a.m. She was at a motel off Highway 19. Her voice was slurred. She begged me not to tell Mom and Dad. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father opened his mouth to speak, but thought better of it. When I arrived, she was battered, her face bruised, her hands shaking. And there in the corner of the room was a little girl, 2 years old, barefoot, frightened, and alone. The air in the room grew thin. I saw my cousin lower her fork. My Aunt Gloria closed her eyes. She was Vivian's daughter. No one knew, not even me. Her name was Clara Hart. And still, no one spoke. No one interrupted because they knew. On some level, they had always known that something was being hidden. Some terrible family fissure glossed over with holiday smiles and selective memory. I took them to the hospital. Vivian was high. Clara was malnourished. She had an ear infection and a fever. CPS got involved immediately. They were going to place Clara in foster care, and I couldn't let that happen. My hand tightened around the stem of the glass as I steadied my voice. I took her home. I became her guardian. Her bedtime, her nightmares, her therapy sessions, her laughter, they were all mine. I loved her with everything I had. Across from me, Vivian looked like she'd been punched. "You gave her up," she said, her voice brittle, cracking. "I gave her back to you," I corrected. "After you came out of rehab, after you promised you'd changed, after you told me Daniel Cross, your new boyfriend, was ready to help you raise her. I let you take her because I believed you." Vivian's face was unreadable, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the table. "What none of you know," I continued, "is that 2 months after I gave Clara back, I was hospitalized. Emergency surgery, a ruptured appendix, massive infection. I survived, but I was left infertile. I'll never have children. And I never told you because I didn't want pity, because I wanted peace." The table stayed silent, stunned. "But that peace," I said quietly, "was bought with my silence, with your jokes, Vivian, with your constant, deliberate humiliation. Even after you knew, especially after you knew." I turned to Richard, whose eyes hadn't left mine. "You found something, didn't you?" He nodded. "Court records, foster care files. After she left you, Evelyn, she abandoned Clara again, left her with Daniel when they broke up. He called social services. Clara went into the system. The final blow landed. My parents gasped. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. I had believed Clara was safe. And all this time, she was alone again. I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me, each face at that table blurring into the next. Family, yes, but suddenly strangers. My niece had been in foster care, shuffled between strangers while I sat behind a judge's bench every day, deciding what the best interest of the child looked like for others. The irony cut so deep I thought I might bleed. Vivian stood abruptly, her chair crashing to the floor behind her. "You had no right to bring this up here. You had no right to expose me." Richard remained seated, composed. "You exposed yourself the moment you mocked your sister, knowing full well what she sacrificed." "I didn't ask her to do any of it," Vivian snapped, her voice cracking. "She made that choice. She always made herself the martyr." My mother tried to interject. "Girls, please," "No," I interrupted, standing too. My voice was low, but it carried. "This isn't about what I chose. This is about what you did. You abandoned Clara again and let her vanish into the system. You stole the one person I ever considered my family and then discarded her like trash." Vivian's eyes were wild. I was struggling. I had no support. Daniel said he'd take care of her. He had money, a big house. He said he'd handle it, and you believed him. Or did you just find it convenient to walk away again, I asked. You didn't even call me. I was ashamed, she shouted. Okay, is that what you want to hear? I knew I messed up and I didn't want to admit it. You always wanted to make me the villain. I laughed then. Not because it was funny, but because I finally saw it clearly. You made yourself the villain. I spent 5 years carrying the weight of your secrets, of your daughter's trauma, of your choices, and now you want to blame me for telling the truth. Vivian's lip trembled, but she said nothing. My mother looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. My father, he didn't look at me. Not once. Richard's voice broke the silence. I tried, Vivian. I tried to believe in you, but when I found out about Clara and you kept lying, I couldn't. So what now? Vivian asked bitterly. You dump me, marry her instead. The good sister, the perfect judge. No one is perfect, he said, eyes hard. But she's honest. And she doesn't hide behind excuses when a child is hurting. That was the final fracture. Vivian let out a choked sob, grabbed her coat, and stormed from the house, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the chandelier. Silence fell again, and then my mother turned to me. How could you do this to your sister? You humiliated her in front of everyone. Something inside me shattered. Not because of the words, but because I'd expected them. I had hoped for one fragile moment that this time might be different. That maybe, just maybe, they'd see me. You still don't get it, I said. I didn't do this to her. She did it to herself. I'm the one who stayed quiet for years, for peace, but Clara is out there and she needs someone to fight for her. I won't be silent anymore. My father finally spoke, his voice cold. You've torn this family apart. No, I replied, steady now. The rot was always here. I just turned on the lights. I didn't wait for another word. I left my wine untouched, my coat forgot. I walked out into the cold night air, my hands shaking and my heart thudding, but something deeper inside me had gone still. For the first time in years, I felt clear. I went home and didn't sleep. I opened my laptop and filed an emergency inquiry with Child Protective Services. With my background, my experience, my history with Clara, I had grounds. I would find her, and if the courts would allow it, I would bring her home. Vivian had abandoned her again, but this time I would not. 2 days later, the caseworker called. Her voice was brisk, but not unkind. Clara Hart. Yes, we've located her. She's currently placed with a foster mother in Fairview named Margaret Lane. She specializes in cases involving children with attachment trauma. I felt my knees weaken and reached for the counter to steady myself. Is she safe? There was a pause. Yes, she's safe, but she's been moved multiple times in the past 3 years, 4 placements before this one. She's had some difficulties adjusting, which is expected given her history. But Mrs. Lane reports gradual progress. Progress. The word felt like both hope and indictment. Progress that should have been happening in my care in a home she already trusted. Can I see her? I asked, my voice quieter now. I was her temporary guardian once. I raised her for nearly a year. She called me Aunt Evelyn. I see, the woman said, her tone shifting. That's significant. If you're considering a custody petition, we'll need to verify your prior involvement. Do you have legal documentation of that initial guardianship? I do, I replied immediately, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get her back. The caseworker took my information and promised to be in touch. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. I had judged hundreds of parents in courtrooms for less than what my sister had done. And now I had to stand before that same system, not as a judge, but as a petitioner, a supplicant. It was humbling, terrifying, necessary. 3 days later, I found myself parked on a quiet street in front of a modest white bungalow with toys scattered across the lawn. Margaret Lane's home. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, heart pounding. Then I forced myself out and rang the bell. Margaret was in her early 50s, silver-streaked hair tied back, her eyes sharp and discerning. She looked me over like someone who didn't trust easily, which made me like her immediately. You must be Evelyn Hart, she said. Come in. We have a bit of time before Clara gets home from school. Her living room was warm and filled with subtle signs of children, books, puzzles, drawings. I noticed a sketch taped to the fridge. A house, a tree, and a figure holding a smaller figure's hand. The caption read, Me and Aunt Eve. The spelling was off, but the name hit me like a thunderclap. She remembers me, I whispered. Margaret nodded. She mentions you sometimes, not often, but with affection. The dinosaur song comes up. My throat tightened. That old bedtime song I used to sing. How had she held onto that thread through so much chaos? She's cautious, Margaret added. Brilliant, sweet when she feels safe, but she doesn't trust easily. She's had more instability than any child should. And when she begins to feel connection, she tests it hard. I want to be tested, I said. I want her to push me and scream and cry and throw everything she has at me because I will not leave again. Margaret studied me for a long time, then slowly nodded. All right. When she gets home, I'll introduce you as someone who knew her when she was younger. We'll keep it simple for now. No pressure. Let's just see what happens. At 3:47, the school bus pulled up and then she was there. Taller, of course, her hair darker, her face more serious than any 7-year-old should be. But those eyes, God, those eyes still wide, still searching. She stepped into the house, dropped her backpack, and saw me. Her posture stiffened immediately. Clara, Margaret said gently, "This is Miss Evelyn. Do you remember her?" Clara tilted her head, skeptical, studying me the way only a child who's been lied to too many times can. Then she squinted. "You sang the dinosaur song." My heart cracked wide open. "I did," I said, crouching to her level about the little dinosaur who was afraid of the dark and how his mom gave him a nightlight made of stars. Clara didn't speak, but she didn't run either. She just stood there watching me. Then after a long beat, she whispered, "I thought you were gone." I blinked back the tears. "I never wanted to leave you. I tried to stay, but now I'm here." She looked down, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, took one step closer. That one step shattered every wall I'd spent years building around my heart. My instinct was to reach for her, pull her into my arms, feel the weight of her again. But I didn't. I'd learned enough in my courtroom and in my own regrets to know that trust doesn't return on demand. It waits, watches, tests. Clara looked up at Margaret. "Can she stay for dinner?" Margaret smiled. "If she wants to and if you're okay with that." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'd love to." Dinner was spaghetti and garlic bread. Simple, warm, comfort food. Clara ate slowly, silently, occasionally glancing in my direction. Her eyes still held that cautious distance, the kind that asks, "Will you leave again?" I didn't force conversation. I didn't try to entertain. I just stayed. Every now and then I asked about school or her favorite book. Her answers were brief, but she didn't withdraw. That, Margaret would later tell me, was progress. After dessert, Clara stood, walked across the room, and picked up a tattered stuffed animal from the couch, a faded purple bunny. "Do you remember this?" she asked, holding it toward me. I gasped softly. "Mr. Hops." Her lips curled just slightly at the corners. "You gave him to me." "I did," I said, my voice cracking. "After your second nightmare, you said you wanted a guard bunny to watch the door." She looked down at the toy, then back at me. "He still watches." A fragile silence stretched between us, sacred and terrifying. Then Clara said quietly, "Can you come back tomorrow?" I looked to Margaret for permission. She nodded gently. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion pressing at my ribs. "Yes, I'll be here." Over the next 2 weeks, I returned every afternoon. I helped with homework, sat beside her during snack time, read bedtime stories when Margaret allowed me to stay late. Bit by bit, Clara unfurled. It wasn't linear. There were setbacks. One day, she screamed at me for no reason and refused to speak for hours. The next, she slipped her hand into mine without a word. She was testing the edges, searching for the drop-off where people disappear. But I didn't. Not this time. Margaret began leaving us alone in the kitchen while she folded laundry or took calls in the other room. Clara grew bolder, telling me about her favorite teacher, about the nightmare she'd had the night before, about a girl at school who made fun of her worn shoes. I took notes, mental lists of what she liked, what she needed, what I could give, and I started preparing for the next step, filing for custody. Richard helped after the engagement dinner fallout. He'd moved out of Vivian's apartment and reached out to me first tentatively, then with steady purpose. He wasn't chasing forgiveness. He didn't need me to fix him. He just wanted to help me fight for Clara. "Do you want to be her guardian again or her parent?" he asked during one of our legal prep sessions. "I want to be whatever the law lets me be," I replied. "But if it were up to my heart, I'd be her mother." He looked at me for a long time before saying, "Then let's make sure you are." Vivian, predictably, did not go quietly. When she was served notice of the petition, she exploded, called me every name in the book, accused me of betrayal, of jealousy, of stealing her daughter. "You always wanted to be me," she said through a venomous voicemail. "Well, congrats. Now you can have the kid, too." But when she learned that I was also asking the court to investigate the misuse of child support funds, money she'd accepted for years, even after abandoning Clara, her rage became desperation. She showed up at my apartment, screaming in the hallway. Neighbors watched from cracked doors as I stood calm and firm. "Go home, Vivian," I said. "You've already lost her once." "If you keep fighting this way, you'll lose any chance of seeing her again." She spat something I didn't catch and stormed off. It was the last time I saw her before court. The day of the hearing, I sat on the petitioner's side of the courtroom, not the bench. I wore a simple black dress, no robes, no titles, just me, a woman trying to reclaim the only child who had ever called her Aunt Evelyn. Clara wasn't in the room. Of course, the system protects children from having to witness these kinds of battles. But her guardian, Adam Pierce, sat beside me prepared to advocate for her needs. When the judge entered, I rose on instinct. I'd stood for hundreds of judges, but never one holding my fate so directly in their hands. My attorney presented our case, my history of guardianship, my career, my home stability, my consistent presence over the past months. Margaret testified, her words steady and sure. "Clara has begun to rebuild trust," she said, "and the person she trusts is Mrs. Hart." Vivian was called next. She sobbed on the stand, tried to paint herself as a mother wronged by a sister's interference. But the court had the records, evidence of neglect, abandonment, financial misuse. It was too late, and deep down, I think even she knew that. When the judge asked if I had anything to add, I stood and stepped forward, my hands folded to keep them from trembling. The courtroom felt cavernous. Every rustle, every breath amplified in that silence. I had spoken so many times in court before, lectures, rulings, cross-examinations, but never like this. Never for something that mattered so personally. I loved Clara the moment I saw her. I began, my voice soft but unwavering, not out of obligation, not because she was my niece, but because she needed someone and I needed her too. She gave my life direction when it had only been about ambition. For nearly a year, I was the one who got her dressed for preschool, who held her through nightmares, who made her pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. I paused, searching the judge's expression for any sign of reception. She was still but not unkind. I gave her back to her mother because I believed people could change, and because the law told me it was the right thing to do. But the law doesn't feel what I felt when Clara clung to me and asked if I'd still be there tomorrow. I failed her once by trusting too easily. I will not fail her again. When I sat down, my chest felt hollow, emptied of everything but hope and fear. The judge called a brief recess. When she returned, she read from her notes, methodical, deliberate. After review of all presented evidence, testimony, and the recommendations of Child Protective Services, the court finds sufficient grounds to grant guardianship of the minor, Clara Hart, to petitioner Evelyn Hart. My breath hitched. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't believe I had one. No, not one reclaimed, redeemed, restored. The system I had served all my life had finally given something back. Outside the courthouse, the world felt new. Richard was there, waiting. He didn't say anything, just pulled me into a tight embrace. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it," I corrected. A week later, Clara came home. Really home. Her room was exactly as I remembered setting it up years ago. Soft blues and golds, shelves lined with storybooks, a nightlight shaped like stars. That first night, she hesitated before climbing into bed. I sat beside her, humming the old dinosaur song, my voice shaking but sure. When I finished, she whispered, "You're staying this time, right?" I brushed her hair back from her forehead and nodded. Always. And in that moment, in the quiet glow of that little star lamp, everything I'd ever lost, every silence I'd ever endured, finally found its voice again. Thank you for watching this story on Legacy Forsaken. If you believe that standing for truth sometimes means standing alone, but it's still worth it, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more true, powerful stories about justice, family, and finding the strength to speak when silence no longer protects.